friends, and welcome once again to Modeling from Zero, a video series by AK Interactive. In today's video, we'll be working on the details and accessories of our vehicle. And that's not all. We'll show you two techniques of applying chipping. So if you want to learn about them, follow me. As you may be aware, when it comes to improving or decorating our models, there are many different brands that sell spare parts, accessories and components. In this case, we will be using this Allied Vehicles accessory set by Tamiya. The set includes a variety of barrels, fuel cans or different bags and canvas used for camping or to cover the objects stored in the back of the vehicles. So once we've removed the mold lines and prepared the parts just like we showed you in episode 1, we can start to prime them using the 3rd generation black primer. It will be also important to prime all the metallic parts in black, as this color will provide a great base for working with metallic paints, as you'll see in the next video. When everything is primed and dry, we'll choose the tone of the color that we will use on the canvas. In this case, we've opted for canvas tone, which you can find in Adam Wilder's signature set. In this set, you can find all the 3rd generation paints that you need to work on your Allied vehicles. We've diluted the paint with 1 part thinner and 2 parts paint, in this case canvas tone, so that we can apply it with an airbrush. The result is great and we now have a perfect base to build up later. For the cans and the barrels, we've chosen forest green, which may not be the most suitable color, but it will provide some variation with respect to the color tone of the tank. Up until now, we're doing all of this using an airbrush, but remember that you can use a paintbrush instead, even if that approach would take longer. If you've opted for the airbrush, as a reference, we're applying the pressure of 1.8 bars and using a 0.2 mm needle. Next, we're using the number 9 olive drab color to paint some of the cans and this way create some chromatic variety. As for the wooden parts, we're using a mixture of base flesh and cork as the base color. We did cover it with light earth shortly after, which seemed to be a more appropriate color. Remember to always be willing and ready to make these smaller or bigger changes on your projects when needed. And once the base was ready and dry, we made ourselves a wash using Waffen brown and a lot of water. The goal was to simulate a bit of dirt as well as some graining of the box. Don't worry if the results don't seem perfect to you at first try. It can be a bit complicated to find the right tone and the dilution ratio. It's a process of trial and error until you achieve results that seem acceptable to you. If you haven't tried this technique yet, give it a go and try making your washes using the products from AK Interactive. We followed this exact same process with the canvas bags, paying attention to all the folds that we could find on the surface to give them visual depth. When we have done this, the process of highlighting is quite simple, as we only have to paint once again the highest points of the fabric. We don't need to apply heavy strokes, we can simply achieve this by making small dots, what is also known as the stippling technique, on the most prominent areas. This way we can achieve interesting results without the stroke being too obvious. Then we can retouch the leather straps with chocolate chipping. For the fuel tank, we can work up rust effects with dark rust paint using the traditional dotting technique. But we do have some new products from AK Interactive called liquid pigments. So what better surface to try them on than this that will be exposed to different kinds of elements and that will surely deteriorate quickly. We can apply this product directly with the brush that we've dipped into the bottle, and now we'll spread the pigment over different parts of this fuel can. In this case, we'll apply it over the cover. If the color or the effect seems too strong, we can dilute it with its thinner. Here you can see that we've overdone it, so we can fix it with a brush, wet it briefly in some thinner, and then we spread the product over the surface to make this effect appear more realistic. When it comes to rusting effects and weathering, we shall not follow a specific pattern, but instead change up the strokes and lines when applying the pigment to do so in more of a random way so that the effect can look truly realistic. You can do the same thing we did and apply abundant product and remove any excess with the help of a thinner or thin it down before and apply more controlled brush strokes. And while the darker rust color is still wet, we start to apply the lighter tone. The reason for this is to achieve both tones melting into one and make the transition much cleaner and smoother, as would be the case with this kind of rust in real life. Finally, to make the barrel appear more authentic and give it a personal touch, we've created an oil leak using the engine grease from Abteilung 502. This oil paint product is very easy to work with, and we can correct the placement while the product is still wet. And when the liquid pigments are dry, the finish is completely matte and very satisfactory. Next, we'll start painting the rubber of the different wheels using rubber black. This is the perfect color for these kinds of parts, and we recommend you to get a bottle or two if you don't have it at home already, as you'll surely use it on your projects. When it comes to painting these different accessories and the smallest parts of the vehicle, our biggest worry will be not to cover parts that we've already painted. However, there is a solution if this happens, and that is a little trick called weathering and the use of other products that can help us cover up these errors. Now let's move on to the main part of this video, chipping. And for this we'll need a wet palette, our main ally to prevent our paint from drying out. In this video we'll look into two different ways of applying chipping: a sponge and a very fine brush for the smallest details. And the colors we'll be using are light earth, dark rust, and finally black. We'll start with the brush, and for this we'll move the three paints into our wet palette. The moisture from the wet palette will keep our paint fresh and we'll be able to use it for a long time. Another advantage of the wet palette is that the paint itself will be more damp, which will make the process of dilution simpler. And finally, we can keep the wet palette in the fridge when we finish our painting process to pick up where we left off the next day. Now we've mixed together dark rust and black to create a tone that would seem similar to paint chipping that exposes the metal or the intermediate layer of paint. The technique itself is quite simple. We just need to paint small dots randomly in areas where vehicle wear is most probable, such as the vision port protectors, the corners, different hitches and hooks for tying down equipment, and boxes or junk that the soldiers could be bringing with them, as well as plates that would be exposed to weather and elements of the nature, as is the case with these mud guards. Remember that when it comes to chipping, oftentimes less is more. A fine stroke is better than overdoing it and making an error, like what happened here with the mudguard. So be patient and work in a pace that works for you to little by little cover the surfaces of the tank. Keep in mind to be diverse with the pattern to ensure realism of the effect. We're not going to lie to you. This process can take an awful long time to finish, so you must be very patient and not give in to the frustration. There's a very good chance you will make an error or 20, but that's okay. Remember that nobody is perfect and nobody is born knowing how to do all of this. Practice makes perfect, so just keep on trying, and you can be sure that this big of a tank will give you more than enough space to practice. When it comes to this technique, we can use the brush not only to create wear damage, but also scratches. And to do that, we'll need to use the fine tip of the paintbrush to paint very thin lines. The dilution of the paint is very important when it comes to chipping. Paint that is too diluted will be hard to control, while paint that is not thinned down enough will appear very wrinkly. And now to the sponge. We cut different pieces of the sponge and will be sure to remove most of the paint on a paper towel. Then, just like we did with the paintbrush, we'll apply the paint in irregular patterns all around the tank. This technique is very convenient when working on large surfaces, and the only disadvantage is that it's hard to control the amount of paint we remove with a paper towel or napkin, and there is a risk of unrealistic stains as a result of dragging the piece of sponge. This is why we don't find this option preferable, but we wanted to include it in the video and show you how it works. And it's true that a combination of the two techniques can result in a quite realistic and a satisfactory finish, as you see right now. It almost seems as if our tank had just come out of a very hard battle somewhere in the bocage. And now with light earth, we'll outline little by little some of the scratches that we've made on the surface of our vehicle. This will create a sensation of an intermediate layer of paint between the metal and the main paint of the tank. Perhaps this technique is not as realistic as the others, but it does make our model brighter and more visually attractive. When you think about it, the color we've used for chipping, the dark brown tone, could resemble mud, so even if what we're doing right now is not completely authentic, it leaves compelling results. And on top of that, it helps us improve our ability with the brush, so we do recommend that you give it a try. As you can see, the result is very nice and it does not take long to apply, especially when we consider all the time that we have already spent on the previous step. Last but not least, it will be the time to paint the different tools on the side of the vehicle: the axe, pick, utensils, and the metal lever. For the wooden part, we've chosen mahogany brown. We try to be as precise as possible when painting the tools in order to avoid getting the paint on the vehicle itself. So once again, remember to be patient. And the next and final step will be to paint all the metal parts of the tools using black. As we said at the beginning of the video, the black will be the perfect base to work on the metals in the next video, in which we'll talk about the assembly of the tracks, pigments, metals, and the final setup of the scene. So we definitely hope to see you then. Well friends, the building and painting of the Sherman is slowly but surely coming to an end. But don't worry, we still have plenty of techniques and effects to discover in modeling from zero, so don't miss out on the next episode. Until then,